I listened to the American speech at Davos yesterday, amongst others. That's been 2 days of Davos now. And honestly, as somebody who doesn't have Trump derangement syndrome, and as somebody who doesn't think Trump is the greatest leader the world has ever seen, I'm not sure I'm completely neutral. I guess probably not, but I'm certainly more neutral than most people are. And, well, I honestly don't know how to feel after listening to that entire speech. Especially after listening to our own Prime Minister's speech the day before. 2 very different speeches and 2 very different worldviews. One of them was extremely exaggerating and, well, the other one outright lied. As far as I can see, neither is good for Canada or the Canadian people. Canada is just getting stuck in a fight between, well, the US and globalism. And if you've watched any of my previous videos, you'll know I have a huge problem with globalism and, well, I'm globalist. And as I've said before, the further the government gets from its people, the less just it becomes. The worse it operates. I mean, it's common sense. But I don't particularly want to become part of the United States either. I mean, I am very fondly and truly Canadian. So, to hear my Prime Minister say that the rule-based system is dead, and that he is blaming America for killing it, I mean, at least in so many words, well, I immediately think Canada is also supposed to be a rule-based system, and if it's dead, it's because globalist leaders and global corporations and global financial systems, well, they've been abusing this rules-based system for decades now. Bending the rules, hollowing out the system for their own gain. And between the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, and his work at an asset management company, his membership with the WEF, and now his position as Prime Minister of Canada, well, our Prime Minister's part in global finance and global corporations and globalist propaganda and control are certainly not insignificant. And the globalists have been bending the rules and regulations and social norms, well, every chance they get for decades now, while pointing at someone else and saying everything is their fault. I mean, our Prime Minister ran off to China to make security and policing partnerships. That's the exact opposite to the very basis of his speech at Davos. I mean, to be truthful, no part of our Prime Minister's speech gave me any hope for Canada or the Canadian people. And he is clearly fighting for globalism. Not for Canada, and certainly not for you and me. Canadians are just being treated as pawns in this globalist game. On the other hand, listening to the American president, well, I mean, I guess it would have given me hope if I was a US citizen, and I didn't particularly care about the well-being of citizens in other countries. But unfortunately, I'm a citizen in another country, Canada, whose very real problems are being ignored, and the threats from the American president has thrown our politics and what little common sense my country has left, well, into complete disarray. I mean, the US might be becoming a freer country and certainly wealthier, but Canada isn't. I mean, we're heading in the opposite direction. In defense of globalism and the WEF and China. So, unfortunately, as a Canadian, Trump's speech at Davos didn't make me feel any better about the direction the world is headed in. I mean, except that Trump said he wouldn't use force to take over Greenland, which I assume means the same goes for Canada. And I guess that is good news, except, honestly, I wasn't really worried about that in the first place. But I have to look at all this from a secondary view as well. And here, let me put it this way. I used to have a boss. He was the head of the studio I worked for. And through sheer will and stubbornness, he led that studio through a number of, near disasters and dangerous situations. But he always kind of went too far. I mean, with everything. He threw his weight and power around far too much. And, in the end, he would always pull it back. And he never lost sight of the goal. But he was willing to use any means to get there. And, well, many business owners, CEOs, and presidents have very similar personalities. And I remember being out with my fellow co-workers having a beer one night, and I found myself sitting beside his assistant. And we got to talking about, all of this. And she mentioned that her boss, the head of the studio, had a chaotic personality. And that he had to keep a tornado flying around himself at all times. Well, to keep everyone else off balance and in order to keep himself at the center of every storm. And the more storms, the more he could be at the center. And although I do have to say my old boss was a lot less boastful than the American president, there are definitely some similarities there. And if I was an American instead of a Canadian, I'd probably be happy to have this tornado on my side. Yeah. But I'm Canadian, and it's not on my side. So what all this boils down to is that no matter where we end up when all this is over, it's probably best to stay out of the path of a tornado until it's run its course. And if we're lucky, our house will still be standing afterwards. And if we're unlucky, we'll have to decide how to rebuild. All I know for sure is I'll fight for my Canada, the one I grew up in, but not for a globalist one. And I'll fight for my fellow Canadian citizens, but not for this Prime Minister. I mean, I don't consider the American president my enemy, any more than I would consider a storm my enemy. Or my old boss. He is just a force we have to deal with. And I'd much rather partner with America than China or Qatar. I mean, honestly, human rights and freedoms, they're just simply too important to me.